Do you believe that one act of courage can change your life forever? What if, suddenly, something extraordinary happened right after you did what seemed like just the right thing? Picture this: a flooded town, a 14-year-old boy saving an elderly man from being swept away by raging waters. A real hero, right? But here's the mystery. The next day, a sleek black car with tinted windows parks outside his door. Who's inside? What do they want? In this story, you'll uncover how a simple heroic gesture triggered a chain of events no one could have predicted. We'll dive into what really happened and reveal the truth behind that mysterious car. Stick with me until the end, because the twist in this tale will blow your mind. And take note, Davi's bravery might just teach you something valuable about your own life. The rain began as a drizzle, the kind that invited families to gather on porches, sipping tea and swapping stories. But by nightfall, it became a relentless storm. The small town of Westbrook, nestled in a valley surrounded by gentle hills, transformed into a battleground against nature. Narrow streets turned into rushing streams, and wooden houses groaned under the weight of the storm. Davi Johnson, a 14-year-old boy with wide, observant eyes and a sharp wit, was running back home through the deluge. He carried a bundle of wet clothes he'd helped his mother gather before the waters rose. His mind buzzed with worry about their house on the edge of the town, precariously close to the rising river. As he approached the old wooden bridge that connected two parts of the town, a sound sliced through the roar of rain, cries for help. Squinting through the downpour, Davi spotted an old man, clutching a piece of driftwood, fighting to stay above the water's surface. The current dragged him closer to the bridge's jagged supports. "Someone help," Davi shouted, but the streets were eerily deserted, and the few onlookers shouted back, "It's too dangerous, boy." Ignoring their warnings, Davi's determination blazed. He spotted a frayed rope coiled near the bridge, likely abandoned by workers. Tying one end to the bridge's railing, he threw the other toward the struggling man. It took 3 desperate attempts before the man grabbed hold. Davi heaved with all his might, digging his heels into the wooden planks slick with rain. With a final pull, the man collapsed onto the bridge. Davi knelt beside him, breathless. The man, his face pale and his soaked clothes clinging to his frail frame, whispered a trembling "thank you" before fainting. The townsfolk finally arrived, dragging the man and Davi to safety. "That was reckless," one neighbor scolded, but admiration sparkled in their eyes. Yet Davi didn't linger in their praise. He hurried home, brushing off the weight of the day's heroics. The storm had left its scars on Westbrook. Debris littered the narrow streets, and the river, though receded, carried an ominous, swollen current. Davi was up early, his body sore from the previous day's efforts. With his mother, he worked to clear their yard, which was caked in mud and strewn with branches and bits of trash swept in by the flood. "Careful with those twigs near the porch," his mother called out. "They'll clog the drain." Davi nodded, gathering a pile of damp branches in his arms. The early morning sun brought a momentary peace, but his thoughts lingered on the old man he had rescued. Who was he? Had he recovered? The town, as small as it was, hadn't mentioned him much since the incident. The memory of the man's trembling hands clutching the rope stayed vivid in Davi's mind. As he moved to the edge of the yard to dump the debris, the low rumble of an engine broke the quiet. Looking up, he saw an unusual sight for Westbrook. A sleek, black car cruising slowly down their narrow dirt road. The car's tinted windows gleamed under the sunlight, its exterior spotless despite the muddy streets. The vehicle came to a smooth halt directly in front of their house. The engine cut off, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. Davi's mother froze, her broom mid-sweep. "Davi," she said quietly, her voice edged with worry, "get inside." But Davi didn't move. He was too intrigued, too puzzled by the sight of the car. Something so foreign to their modest neighborhood. His curiosity grew when the driver's door opened, and a tall man in a black suit stepped out. His polished shoes sank slightly into the soft mud, but he didn't seem to care. His movements were deliberate, calm, as if he owned the ground he walked on. Davi's mother gripped the broom tighter as the man approached the gate. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone wary. The man's face broke into a polite but distant smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice smooth and composed. "I'm here to speak with your son." "My son?" Her protective instincts flared. "What for?" The man shifted his attention to Davi, who was still standing near the porch steps, holding the branches he'd just collected. "Are you Davi Johnson?" he asked. "Yes," Davi replied, his curiosity overpowering his apprehension. The man reached into his suit jacket and produced a sleek white envelope, sealed with an embossed emblem, a design Davi didn't recognize but found oddly elegant. He extended the envelope toward him. "This is for you." Davi hesitated, glancing at his mother. She shook her head slightly, but Davi, drawn by a mix of intrigue and unease, stepped forward to take it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, the weight of its contents a silent promise of something important. "What's this about?" Davi asked, staring at the man. The man's smile lingered. "It's a message from someone very grateful for what you did yesterday." The words hit Davi like a jolt. "The old man?" The man nodded, but didn't elaborate. Instead, he gestured to the car, where a second figure sat in the driver's seat, face obscured by the dark tint. "My employer wanted me to personally deliver this to you. I suggest you read it carefully." Davi opened the envelope, his fingers fumbling slightly. Inside was a letter, written in elegant cursive. "Mr. Johnson, your courage in the face of danger has not gone unnoticed. The life you saved yesterday is worth more than you may realize. I would like to meet with you personally to discuss a matter of great importance. Transportation will be provided. Sincerely, a friend." Davi reread the letter, his mind racing. "What does this mean?" he asked, holding the paper up to the man. "It means," the man replied smoothly, "that you've caught the attention of someone very influential, and they'd like to thank you in person." Davi's mother stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Why my son? He's just a boy. He didn't do anything unusual." "On the contrary," the man said, his tone remaining calm. "What your son did was extraordinary. And sometimes, extraordinary actions attract extraordinary opportunities." He turned back to Davi. "The car is here to take you to meet my employer. You can refuse, of course, but I would advise against it." Davi looked at his mother. Her face was a storm of emotions: fear, protectiveness, suspicion. "You're not going anywhere with him," she said firmly. "We don't even know who these people are." The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Mrs. Johnson, I assure you, there is no danger. If Davi chooses to come, he will be treated with the utmost respect and care. My employer simply wishes to express their gratitude." "I think I should go," Davi said softly, surprising even himself. "Davi," his mother began, but he cut her off gently. "I'll be okay, Mom. I promise. If it's something weird, I'll come right back." She hesitated, her knuckles white around the broom handle. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "Call me the moment something feels off." "I will," Davi said, stuffing the letter back into the envelope and clutching it tightly. The man opened the car's back door with a smooth gesture. "Shall we?" Davi climbed in, sinking into the soft leather seat. The car smelled faintly of pine and something metallic. The door shut with a quiet thunk, and the vehicle pulled away from the house, leaving his mother standing on the porch, her arms crossed, her face taut with worry. As they drove away, Davi looked back at his house until it disappeared from view. Then he turned his attention to the man in the suit, who sat silently beside him. "Who is your employer, really?" he asked. The man smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough." Davi's grip on the envelope tightened as the car sped toward the unknown, his curiosity and trepidation growing with every mile. The car sped away from Westbrook, leaving behind the muddy streets and familiar hum of the small town. Davi sat quietly in the back seat, his hands gripping the envelope tightly. Through the tinted windows, he watched as the scenery changed, the rural simplicity of his home replaced by sprawling fields and dense patches of forest. The driver, silent and focused, maneuvered the sleek car with precision, while the man in the suit sat beside Davi, his posture impeccable, his eyes straight ahead. The air inside the vehicle was thick with unspoken tension, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. Davi finally broke the silence. Where are we going? The man turned his head slightly, offering a faint smile. To my employer's estate. It's not far. How far? Davi pressed. Far enough to feel like a different world. The man replied cryptically. Davi sank back into the seat, his unease mingling with curiosity. The roads became narrower, winding through wooded hills that seemed to stretch forever. Eventually, the car slowed as they approached a massive iron gate. The gate's ornate design was both beautiful and intimidating, with intricate patterns of vines and symbols etched into the metal. The driver lowered his window and pressed a button on a small console. A deep, resonant chime echoed from somewhere within the forest, and the gates creaked open slowly, revealing a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. The mansion loomed at the end of the drive, a structure so grand that Davi could hardly believe his eyes. The building was 3 stories tall, built from weathered gray stone, with large arched windows reflecting the pale morning light. Ivy climbed the walls, giving the estate an air of ancient elegance. Towering oaks and manicured gardens surrounded the mansion, their beauty undisturbed by the storm that had ravaged Westbrook. Davi's mouth fell open slightly. This place is huge. The man chuckled softly. It is. And every stone has a story. The car came to a stop at the base of a wide staircase leading to the mansion's main entrance. The doors, crafted from dark oak and adorned with golden handles, were as imposing as the rest of the estate. The man in the suit stepped out first, holding the door open for Davi. This way. Davi hesitated, glancing back at the car, then at the sprawling gardens. The sheer scale of everything made him feel small, like an ant in a giant's world. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out, following the man up the stairs. The doors swung open as they approached, as if the house itself anticipated their arrival. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than its exterior. The first thing Davi noticed was the silence, thick, almost reverent, broken only by the faint crackle of a distant fireplace. The entry hall was massive, with a high-vaulted ceiling adorned with a glittering chandelier. Marble floors stretched out in all directions, polished to such a shine that Davi could see his reflection. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banisters carved with intricate patterns. To the left, a long hallway stretched into shadow, while to the right, an archway opened into what appeared to be a sitting room, where plush chairs and elegant rugs awaited guests. This way, the man in the suit said, leading Davi through the sitting room and into another corridor. The walls here were lined with portraits, each one depicting a solemn-looking figure dressed in fine clothing. Their painted eyes seemed to follow Davi as he walked past, sending a shiver down his spine. Who are they? Davi asked, gesturing to the portraits. The Cartwright family, the man replied. They've been stewards of this estate, and much more. For generations. Davi frowned. Much more. The man offered a mysterious smile, but didn't elaborate. At last, they arrived at a set of double doors, carved with symbols that looked older than the mansion itself. The man knocked once, then pushed the doors open, revealing a library unlike anything Davi had ever seen. The room was vast, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly upward, lined with shelves packed with books. A ladder on wheels ran along the shelves, its polished brass gleaming in the light of the roaring fireplace at the far end. A large desk sat in the center, cluttered with papers, maps, and what looked like ancient artifacts. In a high-backed armchair near the fire sat the man Davi had saved, Charles Cartwright. His silver hair caught the firelight, and his sharp gray eyes sparkled with recognition as Davi stepped inside. He looked far better than he had the day before, his clothes crisp and tailored, his demeanor calm and composed. Ah, the young hero, Charles said, rising from his chair with surprising agility. Come in, come in. Davi approached hesitantly, feeling out of place in the grandeur of the library. Charles extended a hand, his grip firm despite the visible veins and slight tremor of age. It's good to see you again. You too, Davi said awkwardly. Are you okay now? Charles chuckled, a deep, warm sound. Thanks to you, yes. I owe you my life, young man. The man in the suit stood by the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Shall I leave you two to talk? he asked. Charles waved a hand dismissively. Yes, thank you, Emery. With a nod, the man in the suit, Emery, stepped out, closing the doors behind him. Charles gestured for Davi to sit in one of the leather chairs by the fire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Davi took in the room, the faint scent of aged books and the warmth of the fire. Charles studied him, a faint smile on his lips, as if he were assessing something unseen. You must be wondering why you're here, Charles said finally. A little, Davi admitted. Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. What you did yesterday was more than just an act of bravery. It was the kind of courage that most people only dream of possessing. And that courage, it has consequences. Davi frowned, confused. What kind of consequences? Charles's gaze grew distant, as if recalling something from long ago. You saved someone who is not meant to be saved. At least, not in the way you think. And now, you're part of something much larger than yourself. Davi's heart pounded. What do you mean? Charles stood and moved to his desk, picking up a small, ornate box. He returned to Davi, holding it out with both hands. This, he said, is the beginning of your journey. Davi hesitated, then reached for the box. The moment his fingers touched it, he felt a strange, almost electric tingle run up his arm. Whatever lay inside, he realized, was going to change his life forever. The car wound its way out of Westbrook, passing through roads Davi had never traveled before. They left the modest houses and muddy streets behind, replaced by dense forests and winding hills. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed as they approached a massive iron gate. It creaked open, revealing a sprawling estate. The mansion that loomed ahead was like something out of a movie. 3 stories of stone and glass, surrounded by manicured gardens that stretched endlessly. The driver parked in front of the grand staircase leading to the entrance. As Davi stepped out, he craned his neck to take it all in. The man in the suit gestured for him to follow. This way. Inside, the mansion was even more impressive. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Portraits of stern-looking men and women lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Davi as he walked. The man led Davi to a library, its walls lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. A fire crackled in the large stone hearth, and in an armchair by the fire sat the man Davi had saved. The old man looked much healthier now, though his face still bore the wear of his ordeal. His sharp gray eyes locked onto Davi as he entered. He smiled, and the lines around his mouth deepened. "Ah, the young hero," he said, his voice warm and resonant. "Come, sit." Davi perched on the edge of a leather chair, unsure of what to say. The old man studied him for a moment, then leaned forward. "You saved my life yesterday. For that, I owe you more than I can express. But I must confess, I am not an ordinary man." Davi frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man gestured toward a globe on the desk beside him. "Have you ever heard of the Cartwright family?" Davi shook his head. "We are influential," the old man said carefully. "Our name is not widely known to the public, but we have shaped events in ways you might not imagine. My name is Charles Cartwright, and I am the last surviving member of my branch of the family." Davi blinked, unsure how this related to him. "Okay." Charles smiled faintly. "Yesterday, you changed the course of history. Whether you meant to or not, you saved someone with connections to a network of power that stretches across the globe." Davi shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong," Charles said. "Many would have stood by, afraid for their own safety. But you didn't. That kind of courage is rare, and it's something my family values deeply." He leaned back, his gaze never leaving Davi's face. "I want to make you an offer. I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't corrupted by greed or fear. There is a legacy I must pass on, and I believe you are the one to carry it forward." Davi stared at him, trying to process the gravity of what he was hearing. "What kind of legacy?" Charles hesitated, then opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a small, ornate box. He placed it on the table between them and lifted the lid. Inside was a key, its surface etched with intricate designs. "This key unlocks something far greater than you can imagine," Charles said. It is part of a puzzle that has been passed down through generations of my family. A secret that must never fall into the wrong hands. Davi's heart pounded. Why me? I'm just a kid. You're more than that, Charles said firmly. You're brave. You're selfless. And, most importantly, you're not bound by the world of lies and manipulation that has consumed so many others. He leaned forward, his expression grave. But this choice is yours. You can take this key and begin a journey that will change your life forever. Or you can walk away, and I will respect your decision. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Davi stared at the key, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Davi's fingers hovered over the ornate key, his mind swirling with questions. He felt the weight of Charles Cartwright's gaze and the gravity of the choice before him. If I take this, Davi said slowly, what happens to my family? To my life back in Westbrook? Charles nodded, as if expecting the question. Your family will be safe. In fact, they will be protected in ways they've never been before. But your life, Davi, your life will never be the same. This is not a path for the faint-hearted. Davi thought about his mother, her struggles to make ends meet, her tireless work to give him a better life. He thought about the simplicity of Westbrook, the familiarity of its muddy streets and kind-hearted neighbors. Could he really leave all of that behind? He looked up at Charles, determination flickering in his young eyes. I'll do it, but only if you promise that my family won't be hurt because of this. Charles's face softened, a flicker of respect in his expression. You have my word. With that, Davi picked up the key. Its cool metal felt oddly heavy in his palm, as if it carried the weight of centuries of secrets. Charles stood, his movements slow but deliberate, and gestured for Davi to follow him. Charles led Davi through a series of corridors, deeper into the mansion. The walls shifted from marble to stone, the air growing cooler with each step. At last, they arrived at a heavy iron door set into the floor. It was circular, with a lock that matched the key's intricate design. This is the vault, Charles said. It has been in my family for generations. Inside lies knowledge and power, but also danger. Once you open this, there's no going back. Davi knelt and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the door hissed as it opened, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. After you, Charles said. Davi swallowed hard but stepped forward, his heart hammering. The staircase led to a cavernous room lit by a strange, otherworldly glow. The walls were covered in ancient symbols and maps, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal with a single object on it, a small, crystalline orb. What is this place? Davi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This, Charles said, stepping beside him, is the Cartwright legacy. That orb contains information gathered over centuries, secrets that could shape the future of humanity. But it's more than just knowledge. It's a key to a network of power that connects people across the globe. Davi stared at the orb, mesmerized by its faint, pulsating light. And you want me to do what, exactly? Protect it, Charles said simply. Learn from it. Use it wisely. But most importantly, ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Before Davi could respond, a sudden clanging echoed through the mansion. Charles froze, his face darkening. We're not alone. He pressed a hidden switch on the wall, and a panel slid open, revealing a small, concealed passage. Hide, he commanded. Do not come out until I say. But, Davi started. Now. Charles snapped. Reluctantly, Davi ducked into the passage, peering through a narrow crack as Charles sealed the panel behind him. Moments later, the vault's door burst open, and a group of men in dark uniforms stormed in, weapons drawn. At their center was a tall figure in a trench coat, his face obscured by the shadows. Charles, the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. Did you really think you could keep this hidden forever? You're too late, Charles replied calmly. The legacy is no longer in my hands. The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Then we'll find whoever you gave it to. But first, we'll deal with you. Davi's breath caught as he watched the intruders advance. He clutched the key tightly in his pocket, realizing that Charles had chosen him for a reason. and that his journey was only beginning. As the men closed in on Charles, he turned to a control panel and pressed a sequence of buttons. Alarms blared, and the vault trembled as mechanisms activated. "Davi," Charles whispered, though the boy couldn't hear him.
"Run."
The concealed passage began to shift, pulling Davi along a narrow, spiraling corridor. He stumbled, nearly dropping the key, but managed to steady himself as the floor beneath him tilted upward. The passage led to the surface, opening into the dense forest surrounding the mansion. Behind him, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoed faintly. He wanted to go back, to help Charles, but he knew he couldn't. His responsibility now was to protect the key and the legacy. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Davi realized he was alone in the woods. The key in his pocket felt heavier than ever, a reminder of the burden he now carried.